Perfect. We're recording this meeting because we received some requests from people who are not able to attend. Um, okay, wonderful. So first off, let me thank you for being here tonight because you're dedicating part of your evening to our seminar on produced water, a very interesting topic and very timely. We have Dan Mueller with us, and he will talk about his background and also will help us understand produced water better this evening. Um, okay, I'm trying to. Dave, did you want to add anything before I move on with the committee volunteer needs?
Sure thing. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dave Cortez, he, him pronouns with the Sierra Club Lone Star chapter. I'm the chapter director based in South Austin. It's great to be here with y'all. We're expecting somewhere between 30 and 40 folks, but we had close to 90 register. So there's definitely interest in this topic, Dan. Thanks for being with us. Y'all, it's a very interesting time in the state and in the country. The governor and his allies are trying to use our taxpayer dollars to invest in everything but conserving water, right? The most cost effective, most efficient method to fixing our water problems. Nationally, we see people trying to shut down, the president and his allies trying to shut down government agencies. People, including in my own family, are facing risks of losing their jobs. And, there's a lot of worry and angst. And so I just want to thank you for giving up some of your time. This committee is a space for folks to build community, to connect and network, to learn about other issues that are affecting people in the panhandle, as you see on the screen, and other parts of the state. I'm really grateful to Evgenia for helping to build this committee. We'd love for you all to be more part of it. And there's just a lot of water issues ranging from wildlife to supply to conservation to water quality in the state. And so this is a great space for you to be. And I'm just really excited to be here with you. Evgenia?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And I don't think I ever introduced myself. We have some new names in the room. Most of people in attendance know me, but I'm Evgenia Spears. I'm water program coordinator with the Sierra Club, and I lead this committee, Water for People and the Environment Committee. And this effort, in many ways, relies on volunteers. Volunteer leaders. We have volunteer leaders in different parts of the state, and on this slide you could see the little water drops where we still need volunteer leaders. So if you feel like if you are passionate about water, if you feel like you can help us to move this effort forward to amplify its impact across the state, feel free to reach out to me and we will talk about the commitment, about the tasks that our volunteer leaders do. And I'll definitely be happy to have you on board. And again, we're on the map here. You could see the areas of need where we need representation. With that, let me very quickly highlight at the very beginning what we're doing next time. This committee meets every monthly on the second Monday of each month. So today's second Monday, we're having a seminar. Then next time it'll be March 10th, also via Zoom, and we will focus on PFAS. I'm still confirming speakers or a speaker or yeah, and I will keep you posted. I'm sure you receive my emails and I'll keep you updated. Okay, so as usual, I prepared some highlights from the water world to open our meeting and just wanted to go over briefly. We already know Senate committees. That happened a couple of weeks ago, I believe. But House committees, they haven't been appointed yet. We still don't know them. Hopefully tomorrow we'll find out. Then tomorrow is also Senate budget hearing on natural resources, so that Article 6 in the budget, I believe, on natural resource agencies. I know I will go testify on Water Development Board, Cyrus will go testify, and I know Craig Nazer will also go testify with us, so looking forward to meeting you in person, Craig. Next is the Inner Harbor Seawater Desalination Plant. We had an action alert when prior to submitting the comments, or not the comments this time, but request for reconsideration. It's a large-scale seawater desalination plant that just got approved. The permit just got approved by TCEQ. So they opened the public comment period to submit request for reconsideration or contested case hearings. We submitted our request for reconsideration, but what I am super happy about is that we also had an action alert going on three or 4 days prior to the deadline for those comments, and over 190 people took action. And the geographic distribution was really, really great. In fact, we had more than 90% of people from non-coastal areas who signed our action alert. And that tells you about the concern, like the I don't know, geographic distribution of concern about this project. We had lots of people from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We had lots of people from the Austin area as well. So all of these comments that we received from our action takers were attached to our comments that we submitted to TCEQ. And in chat, I believe, I don't have the chat open, but the comments will be in chat for you to review. Important piece here to mention is there is a public meeting on Thursday, March 13th at 9:30 a.m. related to these developments. So that's your chance to come and voice your concerns. I checked the TCEQ's website. They basically say that we don't know whether it'll be what modes will be offered, like in person or virtual or both. And so they request to check their website to confirm. And you can see that information in chat as well. And the link to the website where you can confirm whether you can attend virtually if you are not geographically there. Okay. And the location of the meeting, if you are planning to attend in person, will be in chat as well. Of course, we're concerned about this seawater desalination progress in Texas, because we're not against seawater desalination. We're against the irresponsible seawater desalination because Texas is not ready. There are close to non-existent salinity standards to protect our waters. So basically, concentrated brine discharges, if discharged into our basin estuaries, will be very harmful for the aquatic diversity. And also permitting requirements for seawater desalination plants are not there as well. Texas needs more time to figure those things out, so we do things responsibly. Then a week ago, on Sunday, Governor Abbott had State of the State address where he named water as an emergency item. And he specifically talked about the need for large investments in water, including infrastructure improvements and water supply strategies, like desalination I just talked about, or like produced water treatment that Dan is going to talk about in a few minutes. And you can see the legislative priorities of Governor Abbott in chat right now. And that document might take a while to open. For some reason, it's really heavy. But in many ways, it echoes Senator Perry's plan on water supply. We should see, by the way, Senator Perry's bill soon, maybe even this week. But in short, he's seeking one-time $5 billion investment in the Texas Water Fund for infrastructure and new water supply. And also planning to file a constitutional amendment to dedicate $1 billion annually to the Texas Water Supply Fund, starting in 2028. So all in all, they're calling this session transformative in terms of water. They say this is the water session, and legislators are excited. We are paying attention, and you should pay attention as well, because a lot of important conversations are happening, and some of them are related to produced water. And I'll hand it over to Dan at this point. Whereas I'm gonna stop sharing, and then we'll
Perfect.
talk
Yeah.
about produced water. Yeah, and then I will chime in with legislative updates on produced water, and then we'll open the floor for questions. That's the plan.
Perfect. Let me get back. Okay. Well, thanks. Real quick, my background. I'm Dan Mueller. I'm engineer. Worked in water resource issues my entire career. Last 10 plus years have been, one of the items I've been working on have been related to produced water and from an advocacy, science-based advocacy position. So I've got a presentation here where we'll walk through kind of what is produced water, what are the issues around the management, kind of like, why do we care? And what do we know, what we don't know about produced water? I can tell you this, right? There's a lot we don't know about it, which leads to the issues and the challenges about starting to use that water outside oil and gas operations. And then a little bit into where it stands as far as research and somewhat of the regulatory efforts going on. We'll get into that. And I know there's some things to add. A lot of things are kind of starting to pop here in Texas around the TCQ. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's definitely work still to be done to narrow these knowledge gaps. So let me just start off by what is produced water? Well, the oil and gas reserves, where there is oil or gas, as it exits the well, water is associated with that oil and gas reserve. These are old seabeds. So this is, with the oil and gas, there's water. It's salinity. Some cases it can be very high salinity, but it's been there trapped with that oil and gas reserves as long as that has been oil and gas. You say that typically very high levels of total dissolved solids, TDS, that's what makes it salty. We say it's salty, it's a lot of the constituents, the inorganics that are there that are causing that saltiness, but also there's a lot of other stuff besides inorganics there. And it's more than just the TDS that makes it an issue when you start trying to treat this stuff well or robustly to use it for something else. A challenge with produced water is that it varies between the different plays and what's shown in the map of the different plays in the U.S. It also varies over time and varies actually even within the play. So from an engineering standpoint, if you're trying to design something to treat this stuff, you've got to handle not only these interesting and challenging constituents, but they're varying over time and location at the same time. So it's a challenge. So as I mentioned, what is produced water? Well, it is formation water, but it's more than just total dissolved solids that is an issue to be dealt with. Inorganics, organics, and potential radionuclides are in this water. This is the water that's trapped in the formation. On top of that, you've got chemicals that are being added to it through the well completion process, fracturing chemicals. So fracturing process includes injecting various chemicals into the formation to basically release, to fracture the tight formation, releasing the oil and gas, and then that now is flowing back. It's called flowback. It's part of the produced water generated from the wells. It's generated for a period of time after a well is completed, a few weeks or maybe a month. But there's chemicals that are coming back up out of the well that were injected for the fracturing. But it's not just the fracturing chemicals. A well is maintained. There are chemicals that will be injected into the wells as maintenance over the life of the well. So those chemicals are being injected, and they're going to be, to a degree, returned to the surface along with the formation water and all that's there. Another wrinkle to this is that the bottom of the well, this high heat and high pressure, so in essence, you've got chemical reactions occurring within that well. So as you're injecting chemicals, there are now chemical reactions going on. Research has been shown that at high heat and high pressure, we had transformation or degradation products. In essence, what we're saying is that there could potentially be chemicals exiting the well that were not originally present in the formation, nor part of the injected chemicals, but through a chemical process. These are all that are the issues that are going on as you're trying to say, okay, what's in this stuff in order for us to determine how would you treat it to make it appropriate for some other use. It's important to kind of get the definitions down because these numbers, these terms get bounced around. So for the purpose of this presentation, the talk here, we're going to define recycle versus reuse. Recycle is in essence taking that produced water that's generated at the wells treating it a little bit, maybe even not at all, just depends, and then using it as part of the fracturing fluid that's used to fracture another well. So instead of using another water source, whether it's a brackish, a saline, or even fresh water as a source of water for fracturing the well, you can use produced water. That actually is a low-hanging fruit. That's a good idea because basically it requires very little, if any, treatment. And then you're using, as opposed to disposing of the water or trying to treat it for something else, you're using it right back into completing a well. As long as you have more wells to complete, that works. Watch out for leaks and spills because now you're managing this fluid at the surface. So you're moving it around. But in essence, it makes sense that you can develop a program to identify and address leaks and spills. That's recycle. Reuse is something else. Reuse now is taking the water, treating it, and then taking it off the well site and using it for other purposes. And that's really what the discussion, when you start talking about, well, we're going to use produced water, that is really the crux of what is being discussed, if potentially using that water off site. So this chart here just kind of shows that basically right now, the majority of produced water is disposed by deep well injection. That's what has occurred. It's going back very deep formations into wells that have designed and permitted for the injecting of these chemicals. If those wells are properly designed and properly maintained, that's not a bad way to dispose of this stuff. Again, you have leaks and spills, but there are issues that are cropping up, concerns that are popping up about seismic activities that might be triggered from these increased use of disposal wells. So that's an issue, kind of driving people to think, well, maybe we should do something else with this water. Maybe we'll have to do something else with this water. But also there's this thought, well, it's a water source. That's what a lot of people with the legislature and some other folks are talking about. Wait, this is a water source in an arid area. Maybe we can use it for something else. Well, that's that bottom part of this figure here. When you start doing something else with it, it becomes more complicated and there is more risk and is more complicated in what you're having to do with this water. You're having to treat it, you're having to store it, you're having to move it around, then getting it to a point that's of a quality that's appropriate if you're going to either discharge it or use it for something else like an industrial process or irrigation. More complex, more risk, and more complex regulation. That's where a lot of the conversation is right now as we start talking about produced water. So kind of how much water are we talking about? Well, first off, say the data is sparse. So there are estimates and they're the best that can be done. And there's some really good work being done trying to generate some good estimates, but the data is sparse. So coming from the Texas Produced Water Consortium report that just came out, primarily in the Permian Basin, and that's a lot of the focus right now because Permian Basin is the largest oil and gas producing formation in the US and one of the largest in the world. So there's a lot of activity going on in West Texas, and part of that goes into New Mexico. Roughly, there's an estimate that there's about 12 million barrels a day, 42 gallons in a barrel, being generated in produced water in the Permian Basin in Texas. That's about 504 million gallons a day. You see there the acre feet. That can be a lot of water. New Mexico also, as their work is being done, they're estimating about 5.5 million barrels, again, in the Permian Basin area coming from New Mexico. So in that area, it is a lot of water. Now, what are you going to do with it is a challenge, but it is a lot of water. An estimate of how much water is being used, whether it's produced water or whether it's some sort of impaired water, maybe like a saline or brackish water, how much is being used to fracture wells. Again, data is sparse, but there's some estimates. In Texas, based upon the consortium recent report, about 8.1 million barrels a day or 630 million gallons a day of water is being used. Now, this is spread over the entire area of the Permian Basin. So it's not easy moving water around. It's not cheap. It can be expensive using it long distances, but you can see there is still more water being generated than is needed if you could use all of it for fracturing. But there's some logistics that keep you from doing that. But it's just an idea of how much water that based upon estimates that we're talking about. So let's get into what we know and what we don't know about this produced water. There was a really comprehensive study. Now it's about 4 years old, but it was published in 2020. that did a survey across the US, so this is the US, of what is in this produced water. And again, it varies across the US. So this is just a snapshot of giving a list, a potential list of constituents that could be potentially present. It's hard to figure this out because in many cases, there are no analytical methods to even look for the stuff that's there. So you're using research methods, a lot of work being done. In essence, this is a really good basis for a paper to say, well, how big is this issue of knowledge gaps? It came up with roughly around 1,200 constituents potentially present in produced water across the US. This doesn't mean every play, whether it's Permian or anything else, has 1,200 constituents, but across the US, these constituents were identified either through approved analytical methods or research methods. It was at least identified in these wells. That information was then crosswalked with, well, what do we know about, like, what is how many of these constituents are there analytical methods for, approved analytical methods? Not shown here, but that number is basically 24%. So of these roughly 1,200 constituents, roughly about a quarter have approved analytical methods. The 3/4 do not. We have to use research methods as such to figure out if they're even there. That's going to be an issue when it comes to trying to do permitting and developing a regulatory program, because you need approved analytical methods. Hazard data, only about 44% of those constituents had hazard data. As you start looking at, well, what is the toxicity of this, and toxicity values, roughly only about 14%. In essence, a large knowledge gap there about, well, of these constituents that are there, what do we know about them? I want to be really clear here, though, we're not saying, never have said that all 1,200 constituents, or roughly whatever it may be, and again, this is across the US, all of these constituents are toxic, or, because how you define that, but or let's just say are bad actors. But I would say some that are, and that's where it gets the crux. Well, how do we figure this out? Which are the ones that we really need to look at and know more about, and know that if a treatment process will remove? This is just a snapshot of the fact that there is a lot we don't know about these constituents. So that's the challenge, starting right off there with what the challenges is, and narrow these gaps. Well, the way to narrow these gaps, and this is a work that has been going on now for a number of years, few years now, within both the New Mexico Consortium and more recently the Texas Consortium, and narrowing the gaps. And what they've been working on is looking at the chemical and toxicological characterization of the produced water, kind of trying to prioritize, look at the constituents of concern, and then look at which ones would likely survive treatment, what kind of treatment, so what kind of effluent quality would there be required, what kind of solids management, all these things pop up, including how to adequately test treatment technologies that are being applied to these constituents, and how effective and reliably that treatment process works. These treatment processes being checked, because basically, are verified, because this is a difficult fluid to treat. As you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff in it. The picture there, and that I've inserted there, says, I hear presentations many times from technology providers showing these beakers, saying, well, here's the raw fluid, and it's gone through our treatment, and now it's clear. Well, I grant you, okay, you've got clear fluid, but clear doesn't mean clean. There's still a lot of stuff can be in there, particularly things of concern that are toxic at low levels. So just because it's clear doesn't mean it's clean. We got to look at the analytics of this to see really what is there and what has survived treatment. Then once we figure out if a treatment process is working effectively and reliably, well, what are the costs? What is the all-in cost? A big question still out there to layer on top of these questions is like, well, how much is it going to really cost to do this? So that kind of gets into the economic challenges, and numbers are getting knocked around. And I'm on technical committees of both the Texas Consortium and the New Mexico Consortium. And so we're seeing some data coming in. We're hearing presentations that are being not only within the consortiums, but also here outside the consortium about, well, we can treat this produced water at X dollars a barrel or X dollar, whatever it may be. And the question comes into, well, is that the full treatment cost? Because basically it's more than just what it costs to treat that fluid. Any fluid that you treat, is that you're going to have solids, a management stream. Even though you have a treated stream being generated, you also have a solids management stream still to be handled. That's still going to happen. And that's a concentration of the constituents that you remove from the fluid. A big question is what the power costs are. When you're looking at the Permian Basin, I really didn't touch on this yet, but I should mention this, that the total dissolved solid level and seawater is roughly around 30 to 35,000 parts per million. Permian Basin produced water is easily in the 100 to 150, even close to 200 parts per million TDS. So that in itself is a difficult fluid to work with, much less all the other constituents that are present. So, and that also generates quite a bit of solids because you're removing all of the TDS from that fluid in the course of treatment. So there is a solids management cost. Power costs are a big deal. Usually with the high salinities that we're looking at in the Permian primarily, there are some lower salinity levels, roughly in the maybe the 10 or 15,000, but the majority of the produced water in the Permian is much higher than that, as I mentioned, in the hundreds or so. It's going to take a thermal process in order to desal that, and you're going to have a high power cost with that. So, but what is that? That's the question. As well as the ongoing operations, recoup capital costs. And then once you treat this water, you've got to move it. You got where's it being generated, and then where are you going to move it to be used? And so all in costs have to be factored in. And frankly, right now, I haven't seen good reliable data to say we have a good handle on a treatment process and what that total cost is. That's the challenge still to clear about how expensive is this water going to be. To give you an example, then, as we kind of convert units, because in the oil and gas industry, you talk about barrels, costs have been saying that, well, can you get it down to $2 a barrel or $1 a barrel cost? In the 2022 Texas Consortium report, in surveying what was out there, it was said that, you know what, based upon data we're seeing or information we're seeing from where this is being done, cost is roughly going to be anywhere from $2 to $10 a barrel at that time. Very general, wide range. That's because it's not a lot of this is being piloted and being looked at. But when you convert that to acre feet, you're talking really expensive water. So they had to balance that with what is that cost and how expensive it, who's going to pay that? Who's going to pay that much for that water? Of course, there's a disposal cost. You can kind of maybe offset that, but it's expensive. So I'll talk a little about the regulatory challenges. And first off, what I want to just first off and say, embrace the low-hanging fruit. When you start to talk regulatory challenges, number one is maximize the recycle. I mentioned that before. Use this water to the extent that it can. And a lot of the producers out in the Permian and elsewhere are working to maximize that number, basically use produced water to the maximum that it can to basically fracture other wells. That minimizes the demand on other water resources and also reduces the amount of water that's being disposed. So that's right off the bat, maximize that. But then beyond that, how do you develop a regulatory program? Well, look at the issues that we have. There's a lack of programs specific to the beneficial use of produced water. In essence, this is an industrial waste stream that's fairly new on the scene. Been looking at it for about 5+ years. Early on, it was looked more for recycling, and now it's looking for other purposes. There's other industrial waste streams that over these decades and so have gotten comfortable with the technology and what effluent level should be, effluent limit should be for them. Well, produced water is relatively new, so they're still sorting this out. Again, what's in it, what are the treatment processes that are required, and how clean is clean, again, for the specific purpose. So more research is vital to get these programs to move forward. What we don't want to do is to create more risks than we solve, is starting to move too quickly on this before the science can really back up what are the constituents of concern and what are the treatment process capability of and limitations of removing that. So the goal is to really a fit for purpose program, but there's still work going on to do that. One thing I just kind of want to throw in here, because sometimes you hear this, people will say that, well, we've treated this produced water and we meet the drinking water standards. Well, drinking water standards are roughly around 90 constituents. They were designed around drinking water, basically a water source is being treated for drinking. Drinking water standards are not effluent standards. That's apples and oranges. I challenge that whenever I hear folks say that, because I say, look, you know, you may be able to treat this fluid to drinking water standards, but I'm not drinking it, and no one else should either. And you're not going to. There's likely industrial effluents out there of different industries that if you were to test that effluent, you know, it might meet drinking water standards, but again, that's not a criteria for an effluent. That's just different. So I throw that in there that if you hear that, don't go down that road. It's effluent standards that we have to be looking at with the vast array of constituents that could potentially be present in that fluid. So I'll touch a little bit here on where regulatory and legislative developments are, and I understand in some emails just earlier today that this is changing for TCEQ. That as of about a week or so ago, I understood that there had been 4 MPDES permit applications submitted to the TCEQ. 2 have been deemed administratively complete. Both of those are proposing discharges into basically the Pecos watershed. One's going into Red Bluff Reservoir, proposed to go to Red Bluff Reservoir, another into a side stream that goes into the Pecos. Those are the NGL Energy Partners and Texas Pacific Water Resources. Both of those groups are actively working on a pilot program testing out their treatment processes on that. 2 other submittals that, and from what I understand, neither one has been issued a draft permit yet, so there's nearly nothing to comment on. There might be some more developments on that as we move along. Also, there were 2 submittals that were not yet deemed administratively complete, therefore we don't really know much about them. Once they're deemed administratively complete, well, then they'll be acknowledged and there'll be a draft permit application. You can look at it. I understand there may be, from meetings I guess occurred earlier today that I didn't listen in, there may actually be more submitted. So there are permit discharge permits being submitted to the TCEQ for treated produced water to be discharged in Texas. So something definitely to watch. And there's a few bills that I know that have been filed. I haven't had a chance to read through those. Some other folks here on the call may have already, but it's in just to kind of flag that that question, that issue. I do want to mention that there is research and testing making progress on narrowing these challenges. In the New Mexico Research Consortium is now entered its 5th year. I guess it's close to entering its 6th year now. A lot of research is coming out of New Mexico State and Las Cruces, as well as some industry partners. We've got the Texas consortium that has now been going on for a few years, and there's a lot of overlap in membership on those, so there's communication back and forth. Also, there's a number of industry-led pilots that are out there that are still, from what I understand, will be passing their data through the consortiums to kind of take a look at that. And then the consortiums will be able to make comments on it. I want to be real clear that on the technical side of the consortiums, recommendations are not coming from that. It's basically that these technical people on the committees will make comments on those, have questions about these, and there'll be some back and forth on that. But there are pilots that are moving along, looking at treatment technologies and the effectiveness and what all then costs are. There's still work to be done on that, and those are still, let's say, they're in place and operating, and there's some more planned. So that's good. At least we're getting some pilots out there in the field that are scaled up out of the laboratory in the field, particularly in the Permian, looking at testing. These are not, permitted facilities. These are purely testing pilots to see how well or how not these proposed technologies will work. Also, there's analytical and toxicological work going on in the research institutions, New Mexico State, and I'm sure Texas Tech, and as well as some others with Texas and everywhere else that's looking at this, as well as some other states. But looking at that toxicological question, look at the analytical methods, looking at whether these unknowns, these non-targeted analysis where you're not sure, what's there, but there are processes that chemists can go to kind of narrow down and see, well, we don't have an analytical method for a particular constituent, but we can kind of work the process through to determine that. Long story short, there is work going on. It's narrowing this. There's work still to be done on this, but there is some work moving forward. So I did want to touch on because people say, well, how about other states? Well, California comes up right off the bat because in California, there is a use of produced water. They've been using produced water to irrigate crops for a number of years, but there's questions that have come up about that. This now is a few years old where the California board kind of made assurance to the public that it's safe. But these are some comments that came from that, from some of the folks that reviewed that report, saying that really that they're, uh, saying that the really evidence really wasn't complete, or there's really some leading expert here, Thomas Bortridge, I know really well out of Colorado State, took a look at that, and he's actually working with some of the folks that are doing the pilots in the Texas side. He's involved in that, which is good. He's a good researcher. He's not sure. He's saying that you really couldn't draw the same conclusions from that. So there's questions about that. And so what's happening is that in California, they've been doing it for a while, but now there's questions arising. Well, okay, is that really a good idea to do? And now questions are arising. They're kind of going after the fact, trying to test this treated produced water. And it's a different produced water, much less level of TDS. It is particularly in the Permian, but still these other constituents potentially present. But it's kind of after the fact. It makes a lot more sense. And that's where pushing from the science-based advocacy on this side is that let's ask these questions up front now and get answers before you start doing it, as opposed to trying after the fact, trying to figure it out. In fact, this report just came out, again, California report just came out a year or so ago, and it particularly stated that, looked at the program and said, you know what, this whole use of produced water for irrigation in California really lacks the rigorous science that basically was used for wastewater reuse. It talked about how there's a need for further science. Basically, the talking points we have here, that let's get the science in front of the regulatory effort to inform it. So this report very recently came out looking on that side. It would have been in Pennsylvania, because in the Marcellus area, a lot more rain up there, a lot more water being, as far as discharge, as far as rivers to discharge in, but not very many disposal wells. There are some examples of treatment plants there that have been treating produced water and discharging and having an NPDES permit. A few things are very different when you look at Pennsylvania and the Marcellus, you look at Permian. Number one is this discharge into rivers that many times they had 1,000-to-1 dilution for their treated effluent because of the rivers. The Susquehanna particularly is what was being used. Well, that right there, that doesn't exist, obviously, in West Texas. And although dilution of a treated effluent can be considered when developing a permit, again, different than what you would have in West Texas. However, those plants have shut down. There were issues with those plants. Number one is that the oil and gas, the produced water level, the produced water generation dropped, but there's also some environmental issues with how those plants were run. Those plants now are shut down. So we kind of have to look at the fact that they've gone through that in Pennsylvania. There were issues with those plants. Those plants are now shuttered. And so you need to look at, well, why is that the case? So it's been done, and it is occurring elsewhere, but again, everything is unique. Situations are unique. So just to be cognizant of that. So I'll wrap this up with some, and then we can have any kind of conversation discussions about this. So high level takeaways mentioned before. Number one, maximize the recycle to lessen demands on other water resources. That's the low hanging fruit. That's the thing to do with produced water. Industries are working toward that. Roughly, latest numbers I've seen is in the Texas Permian, the recycle rate is about 50 to 60% of the produced water generated is being used to fracture other wells. But again, the data is sparse. The goal is many producers have goals of near 100% or as much as they can. So actually, there's still work to be done to maximize that. Other than that, continue the research. You've got to continue this research to narrow the scientific, technical, and economic knowledge gaps to inform both industry practices and regulatory program. What are the constituents of concern? What are the toxicological impacts? What are the constituents that we need to be really looking closely at that are of concern, and where the treatment processes can adequately remove that? And that gets down to whether, properly test these treatment facilities for sufficient amount of times and pilot programs, and what are the costs of that. But then that last item bullet, the third bullet throw in there is that, well, recognize that this water source is a product of oil and gas exploration and production. Regardless, wherever you may stand on oil and gas being the primary energy source, at some point in time, it will not be. Now, how soon that will occur, won't get into that conversation, but you have to recognize, I think it's important for water planners to recognize that this water source is not always going to be there, or it's certainly not going to be there at the level it's there today. So as you're looking at what are the options for this water, there may be some near-term uses if we can clear the scientific, technical, and economic challenges and knowledge gaps. But always back in the mind, remember that this is a water source that whether oil and gas or the fossil fuels decrease in it as being the primary energy source, or just because of economic reasons, oil and gas production decreases, that will impact this water source. It will decrease as well. Important to just be considered as we're talking about long-term planning and about what is maybe an applicable use of this water. So that is all I have, and I haven't been able to follow chat. So I'll stop share here and pass it back over to and hope we have time for conversations or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, but thanks for the time here.
Yeah, sounds good. Sorry to interrupt you, Dan, because I was trying to say, like, don't open it for questions and answers just yet. But thank you so much for sharing so many important facts and interesting facts about produced water. I was going to chime in very, very briefly to talk about the legislative developments around produced water, as well as the Sierra Club's position on produced water. We basically stand for prohibiting discharges of produced water in the environment. So I just attended a hearing of the Senate Committee on Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs. And in fact, TCEQ testified there, and they said they have 6 pending permits already. And as an exceptional item request, they're requesting $6.7 million dollars and 39 FTEs for produced water only. So that's what the talk was about today, and tomorrow they will also talk about it. TCEQ will testify at the Senate Finance Committee hearing. We support ongoing research that is done by the Texas Produced Water Consortium, reuse of produced water in the oil and gas industry, because it's the most sensible option. It makes a lot of sense. And also the Railroad Commission of Texas is requesting $7.7 million to create a publicly available produced water injection database. We support that as well to track that information. So in general, the Sierra Club's position is that before we pursue some expensive, largely unknown avenues for water supply, we should prioritize water conservation and reuse, including fixing failing infrastructure like leaky pipes. As far as the relevant bills on produced water, Dan touched on that a little bit. House Bill 1808 by Republican Landgraf was filed a few weeks ago, but it's like a shell bill. There are no specifics. It's intended to provide regulations for produced water management, but being a shell bill, it basically leaves the details for a later time. We're watching this bill. And then the Senate bill filed by Birdwell and Sparks, they both sponsoring that bill. I think it was filed like last week, less than a week ago, for TCEQ to issue permits for land application of treated produced water. We don't like this bill because we're not ready to treat produced water. We don't know how it needs to be treated. As Dan said, we don't know how safe it is or how unsafe it is. Important to note here is that this bill has a companion bill in the House. And that tells you basically when a bill has a companion bill, it's being carried in both chambers, and it tells you about the level of interest among the legislators to this issue and the desire to pass. The legislators clearly want for this bill to pass. And then we are expecting the big water bill from Senator Perry to be filed anytime now, and it will include investments into treatment of produced water. And by the way, if you want to know more about Senator Perry's take on water and his position on water supply on February 13th, this Thursday. He will have a talk that can be attended online, and I will share the information in chat where you can RSVP and hop onto the call and be part of the conversation. Okay, with that, let's open the floor to questions. We have several questions in chat. Dan, I will help you find them.
Okay.
Craig is asking, last I knew fracking water contents was proprietary knowledge. Has that changed?
So there is a what do they call it, confidential business information clause in the chemicals that are basically disclosed from fracturing chemicals. So some of those chemicals can be withheld and not disclosed as far as what's in them. From what I understand, that really hasn't changed. But a lot of the chemicals are being disclosed as far as what's used in fracturing, and there's been work with the industry to try to look at some of the things that are more toxic. The big question though is the fact that what we're looking at is what's coming up out of the well. So fracture chemicals are certainly an issue. They're going down the hole. Some of them are coming up, but if we've got that information, be able to look at what's coming out of the well, which is a combination of all these different chemicals and constituents. That's the big question about whether or not you use for then answering the question about what could potentially the produced water be treated and potentially, if you can clear these hurdles, used for.
Thank you. We have another question in chat coming from Frank. If produced water is put in an evaporation pond, can the evaporated water carry harmful additives or chemicals into the atmosphere with it?
And I'm a water treatment person, but yes, I mean that same sort of thing is when you have the thermodistillation. Same sort of thing is happening there. Is that you got chemicals that are they're evaporated with that water. They'll be released into the air. Same as in the problem with the distillation process is that if it boils with the water, it's going to be in the distillate. It'll be in what's considered the clean water that comes out of the thermal process. Those chemicals are going to be present. So yes, they can be.
Okay, we have one more, or more even, from Eric. I've heard that Israel leads the world in removing chemicals present in Dead Sea water, for instance. Any hints or usefulness there?
So Israel has been really a leader in looking at using higher salinity water for ag purposes. In fact, looking at crops that are being basically cultivated or work to basically acclimate themselves, and also treating this as well as a number of other countries in the Middle East because again, water is a big deal. The thing is that it's these other constituents. So you got the technology to desal to get that high salinity water material out of the water. That's one process. Produced water layers on top of that the fact that there's a lot of other chemicals that are present there that we also have to be addressed. So that's the complicating factor of produced water, and it's going to be expensive. There's regardless, if you look at the fact of this common sense of, you got brackish water, you desal brackish water, that's one expense. You desal seawater, that's another expense, higher salinity. Now you go up to produced water that's many times higher in salinity, layered with other chemicals, obviously more expensive.
Thank you, Dan. Another question, can produced water re-injected in oil and gas wells have negative impacts on aquifers that are used for agricultural irrigation?
So typically, these oil and gas reserves are extremely deep. So well below, in this case, aquifers that are being tapped for either ag purposes or other purposes. However, you've got the well that's penetrating through those zones, and you've got old wells. This is coming up a lot, and you're hearing this as kind of an offset, another topic around produced water of these old orphaned and abandoned wells that are now releasing high salinity waters out of it. What has happened is that those wells were not properly plugged, And so pressure now, whether it's from injecting back into those lower zones or the fact that the well itself has deteriorated over time, then it could potentially then impact the aquifers that well casing is penetrating, getting deep into that, where the injection zone is, or being pushed up through old wells that have been there for a long time. Permian Basin has been around for 100 years. So there's some really old wells out there. It was really, it really came to life, during the early 1900s and in the World War II. So you've got a lot of wells out there that are old and deteriorated. So the question is that there is a potential pathway, not necessarily through the actual zones that are separating deep zones versus shallow zones. Although if it's close enough, it possibly could. But there is a big question coming up about and issues that we're seeing with these orphaned and abandoned wells that are failing.
Yeah. Okay, another question. Might withdrawal of water from fracked sites increase the incidence of earthquakes? Bob is asking.
So I'm sorry. So what have the
Might withdrawal of water from fracked sites increase the incidence of earthquakes?
from what I understand, and I'm an engineer, not a geologist, that the seismic events are likely coming from the injected fluid going back in and pressuring up zones because they're being used for disposal, and they're pumping the water back down there. Extracting the oil and gas reserve, I'm not saying it hasn't. It's not one that I'm familiar with, or that I've heard, that have been at least well known. But the seismic events that have been recognized, the increased seismic events that have been recognized, I know that they're from listening to talks of folks who know what they're talking about that, who have experience in that and have expertise that I don't, definitely. But saying that from the injection of certain zones, that is initiating some of these small seismic events. Which I say small, that small means, not if your house is the one that's being shaken by it, but these microseismic events. But but that is a question. And that is one of the drivers that's kind of pushing folks to say, well, we need to do something else with this water. Well, I understand, but looking at it from the standpoint of, but let's don't go too fast, because again, you're gonna cause more problems than you're trying to solve if you push too quickly and then inadvertently have issues with improperly treated, or at least to the point that it's for whatever the purpose you're using it for. So, but it is an issue to be thinking about.
Hey, sounds great. I ran out of questions in chat. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise hand or just unmute and go ahead. Thank you, Dan, for all this information.
Sure.
Any
And I
other
think
questions?
I'll be sure to get the slides out. Happy to share those slides, and then, well, I think my contact information. If you have questions or such, happy to, after the fact, just email me or let me know. Happy to
Yeah.
try.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm one of those people who has questions after the fact. I need to sleep on it and then I come up with a list of questions. But we've opened the door to very important discussion today and to hopefully many more. So feel free to reach out to us, and we'll continue this conversation. It's important to continue talking about it and raising public awareness about produced water. The legislature is pushing, as you saw today, they're pushing for reuse of produced water, and science needs time. One last call for questions. Last
I'll
comments.
just chime in briefly, Evgenia. Thank you, Dan. You're the best. Thanks for the school lesson. That was deep. But y'all, we welcome ideas. If you'd like to hear about other topics, some of the Houston folks flagged PFAS for us a month or two ago, so we're trying to get speakers about that. If you want to hear about other water topics, like wildlife ones, Kemp's Ridley sea turtle, or other impacts on endangered species, let us know and sign up for the committee. Evgenia, what's the best way for people to sign up to be more involved with some of the planning side of things? And then we'll kick it to Frank.
Yes, I will share the link. I apologize for it being longer because I don't have the short link handy, but this is the form that you can fill out and sign up for our updates and be part of the committee, as well as express interest in particular topics.
Cool. Thank you. Frank, go for it, man.
I was just curious if there are any current industrial water treatment processes that might be relevant prototypes for attempting to treat produced water,
Yes,
like desalination, certain desalination approaches or that sort of thing, but I guess if we don't know all the chemicals that might be involved, then that's the problem, but.
that's the challenge, right? Well, the desal technologies that have been used for other water, whether it's brackish or saline water, seawaters and such, depending upon the salinity levels in the produced water, if it's low enough, reverse osmosis is a process. But it's going to take more than one process to take care of the constituents that are present. So reverse osmosis, is a potential technology. It was, all these processes were designed around not produced water, but lower salinity water. So even after it goes through reverse osmosis, if the salinity level is low enough, then you're still going to do some tertiary treatment to get the rest of these chemicals out that are potentially there. For the higher salinity levels that we're talking about in the Permian, it's going to be some sort of thermal process, a basically distillation process, an industrial distillation process. But even then, again, you've got organics and such that boil off with the water that needs to be treated. So it's not just the desal, the thermo, and that's expensive, but that's a process. That's what's being tested right now. But then it looks at, well, what do we have to line up behind that process I guess two things. Then behind that process to then clean up, what other chemicals have passed through that desal and are still there that are constituents of concern. There's a lot fewer, gotten rid of some stuff, but there's still things to be concerned about. But also you're looking at pre-treatment before that, because one of the issues with the high salinity waters like that is you have process fouling. These units are, they're finicky. Thermals is pretty much bulletproof, but there's fouling involved. So you need to take some things out prior to make it work better. And that's also the conversation. It's what I talk about. Processes have to be both effective, meaning that they work, but they also have to be reliable, because if they're always going down for maintenance, the redundancy, again, your costs increase. So basically desal processes, that's a core that's basically being used. Ones that have been designed for other systems, other fluids are being used here, but it's what comes after that needed to kind of clean up that, to do polishing, to get it clean enough to get these chemicals out. That's a big question. I think there's someone else with a raised hand.
Elida? Go ahead, Elida.
Yeah, I think to go off of that question, where they're proposing to build the desalination plants here in the Corpus Christi area and the San Patricio, like looking to Ship Channel, there's a lot of discharge. They say like these facilities say that they treat the water, and then they discharge it back into the bays, and we also have a lot of seepage from these facilities. And, as was mentioned, a lot of this is proprietary information. So, we don't even know like what is actually in our water to begin with. And they're promising our communities that they're going to clean up this water like well enough to make it potable for us to consume. And it's just, our concerns are that, one, is that even something that can be accomplished, with the decades of runoff and seepage and like low environmental regulations. And then two, a lot of this is going to be returned to the water. They're saying, well, we're not going to be returning anything that, is already in there to begin with, but they're returning it in like high concentrated levels. And so like these are things that we've been flagging for the community, and they've kind of just been dismissing that. So are these things to be concerned about? And then also a separate issue is like for our freshwater users, like the lake, the people are very much in favor of desalination because they're saying that, well, it'll help, then keep our lake levels high. which we currently have laws that need freshwater releases to help dilute, some of the water because of the rising salinity levels in our ecosystems. So these are all things we're flagging. I just want to be sure like we're flagging the right things and not like misinforming our communities because they're making us sound crazy now.
Yeah.
Check.
Well, I think trying to answer that from the desal processes, yeah, you mentioned you have a waste stream. It's a concentration of the stuff that was taken out of that water, and that waste stream has to be properly managed. Now, not exactly what's going on with seawater desal, but understand there's issues about the question of where is that stuff going. You have those same types of questions when you're talking about produced water, only now you've got a bunch of other dirty stuff mixed in with that's you've now pulled out of that water. You've made that distillate cleaner. It may not be clean enough, but you've made it cleaner, and you're gonna have to just maybe work on it to get it clean enough. And that's the question: how clean can it get it? Need to be, but still, you've pulled all this stuff out and you've concentrated it. You've got to manage it still, and so it goes back into the all-in cost. When someone says I can, again, propose that they're saying we can treat produced water at X dollars a barrel, the question is, well, is that include everything? Because that waste stream is going to be significant. If you think about it, if you're desal seawater, you're doing 35,000 parts per million, you're creating a waste stream based upon that. If you're desaling a fluid that's starting off at 150 or 200,000 parts per million, you've increase that load of solids that they're still a slurry. That's got to be managed. There's a lot of it there, and it's significant that it'll have to be managed and produce water. Still going to have to be disposed of. In fact, it's concentrated. Yeah, and that's what do you do with it? Well, so there's still a disposal of this whole thing. Of we've been talking about produced water, and it's all factored in to make sure that we've got all the bases covered. The questions you're asking there with seawater distillation, exact same questions we're asking with produced water.
Any other last comments? Last questions, 7:34. We're a little bit past our planned end time. As I said, we can continue this conversation, reach out to us. Feel free to, I will send out the follow-up email to everyone in attendance. I usually do that. I typically do it the next day, but probably tomorrow it will not happen because I will be at the Capitol all day, attending that hearing of the Senate Finance Committee. But this week, definitely you will see an email from me together with the resources that were exchanged here in chat. Dan said that he could share the slides, right, Dan? Am I not making it up? It's kind of late, so I hope. Yeah, good. Just verifying. And yeah, we'll stay in touch. Sign up for this committee if you haven't. Tell us what you would like to learn more about, and we'll be happy to engage in that conversation. And with that, I hope that everyone has the great rest of your evening, and wonderful Valentine's Day on Friday. Thank you so much, Dan, for the presentation.
Sure.
Thank you for being here tonight. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Glad you're doing better, Virginia.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Adios, y'all.